Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining us for this LinkedIn Live session. Most of you would know TrustWorks for our data protection management and AI governance suite. However, in case you were not aware, we also have a community of in-house privacy professionals where we essentially pool together, if you like, the incredible wealth of knowledge that our 300 plus members have, and share best practices, advice, etc. Tony is one of our long-standing members. We also host monthly roundtable discussions that our members can actively participate in. These are not recorded, but they're rather a private space to share. If you're not a member yet, I would strongly encourage you to join. You can find a link in the comments below. So today we're going to take the opportunity to share some key takeaways, from our recent discussion, which was led by the incredible Tony Hibbert. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't already know Tony, he's a renowned AI governance expert, former AI risk manager for ING Bank. You could say that he helps financial services and tech companies bring order to chaos by helping them to navigate the path of responsible AI. So thank you so much, Tony, for joining us today. Before we begin, just to let you know, if any of you would like to share any comments or questions, please feel free to do so in the chat and we will cover them at the end. So, Tony, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the great introduction and thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you for taking the time to join us today. So, yeah, just to begin, I suppose one of the key differences, if you like, between the GDPR and the AI Act is that the AI Act looks more at the AI systems, whereas the GDPR looks at processing of personal data. So when it comes to large language models, what are, let's say, the distinct phases of processing that we need to be taking into consideration?
Yes, you can look at least the three phases. I mean, you could go into a bit more detail, but in essence, there are three phases. There's the collection of the data, because that's an activity. Mm-hmm. Then there's the training of the model, because you're feeding data to the model. So that's processing, and could be processing of personal data there. And then when you're getting your results out of the model, that is a third potential processing event for personal data. So you've got the collection, the training, and the operation of the model.
Interesting. Okay. And of course, when it comes to personal data occurrences, these might differ too, right? When we're talking about large language models or Gen AI.
Yes. So that's the processing that I just outlined, the three possible phases where you could be processing the personal data. And then the question is, where does the personal data occur? It can occur in that training data. So if you think what the model has been trained on, if it's been collected from the internet, then there's lots of personal data on the internet. So you've probably got some personal data there. You've also got that personal data can be added in terms of RAG, R-A-G, RAG. So this is a part of the technology. And if anybody's ever used ChatGPT, when you upload a document, you're using that RAG technology. So you can, in the document that you upload or you introduce to the model, you can be introducing personal data as well, because the document you upload, a CV or something like that, can contain personal data. Now, what is often not thought about is that the model itself can contain personal data. Because if you ask the model or you trick the model, it can tell you information about individuals because it's been trained on that training data. And okay, these large language models do memorize. And so the training data is, it's no longer part of the story. That information is now somehow represented or modeled in the model itself. So that's the three occurrences of the personal data.
Okay, so the training data, the large language model itself, and the RAG data.
Exactly, yep.
Okay. So let's say in trying to protect this data, let's say, if we look at the likes of data minimization, so what would you say, I suppose, the key points that we need to consider from the GDPR perspective or the AI Act standpoint, what would be the key points we need to consider here?
Okay. Well, first of all, what do we mean by minimization? And it's got its natural sense of, trying to have less data, less personal data. Because the more data, the more likely you're to infringe the data subject's rights.
Yeah.
So having less is a good thing. And it's not only a good thing for compliance with the GDPR, but it can also help in terms of, well, the less data you have, the less data can be leaked. The less data you have, the more efficient the processing and so on. So there are other benefits as well as from a data protection or a GDPR perspective. But from the GDPR perspective, there is a clear principle of data minimization. And that means that you should only use the data that you need, and it's broken down into adequate, relevant, and limited.
Exactly, yeah.
So it really is a sort of a principle there. You also have another provision, which is privacy by design, which also emphasizes to take into account these kind of considerations. But there is a clear principle to minimize the data, to make it proportional to what you're trying to do with the data.
Okay. And this is under GDPR. So when it comes to AI Act, are we looking at a difference or?
It's not really focused, of course, on personal data. It's focused on data, and it looks at other aspects of data. So the data quality, because if you have good data quality, you have a good functioning model, right? But there is some hints of that and a little bit of overlap because the AI Act does talk about the quantity of data. So that's it's still sort of an open question. What do they mean by that? The AI Act is new. We don't have guidance and codes and standards yet, but it also does emphasize that you should look at the quantity, quality, and suitability of data sets. So it may also apply to non-personal data as well as personal data.
Okay, so there is certainly a lot of overlap, let's say, in the requirements. So could you share maybe some minimization techniques that could be used as a provider or even a deployer of large language models?
Yes, there are several techniques, and most of them are obvious. So if you want to minimize the data that you use, you choose a smaller data set. So you choose a data set without personal data in it, and then you're already there within in terms of your minimization. You can try and remove data from the data set, so remove the personal data. So on a small data set, that might be manageable. You go through, take out the names and addresses of the people, and you're done. But when you get to the petabytes and that kind of scale, the scale where the data is coming from the internet, and you've got the commons data set, which is a petabyte and so on, and trying to practically take out personal data, well, where do you start? You need some tooling, and then even with the tooling, you may not get very far because, unstructured data, what do you look for? How do you look for it? And so on. You can use some AI techniques there, but it's still not necessarily getting all the data out.
Of course.
Then you've got another approach, which is to use synthetic data. And, from the sounds of it, synthetic data is data that has been produced and synthesized, I guess is the right verb for that. And that approach is to take a data set and make a similar one or an enhanced one that avoids using the original personal data and so on. There are some problems also with that approach. There is some doubt as to whether, even with a synthetic data set, you can reconstruct the original personal data. So if you've taken an original data set and constructed it to a synthetic data set, you can get hints. You may be able to get even more from the synthetic data set about those individuals.
Oh.
So, yeah. So it's not And there are also problems from a data science point of view. Is it representative data? Is it good data? Is it as good as the real thing? Then you've got a whole range of privacy enhancing techniques. So they are what they're named. So what they do is, well, there's actually two classes of privacy enhancing techniques, one that work on the data itself, and the other that work on the security of the data. So on the second one, the security of data, think encryption, right? You haven't actually changed the underlying data, you just mixed it up and made it secure. But there are also techniques that you can do to obfuscate, mask, tokenize, and add noise to the data itself. And these serve to minimize the data, especially when you're tokenizing, which means, replace somebody's name by that is name number one, that is name number two, and so on. There's a lot of different techniques. Some work better than others for minimizing data. It's horses for courses, but it's also that they have some inherent limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? In terms of having effective models, the more you muck around or you detract from your data, the more likely you are to have poor results. I mean, there's a trade-off between the enhancing the privacy and your accuracy and robustness of your models.
Okay.
So it's not we'll just minimize, we'll just cut out all the personal data and it will still work. That's definitely a consideration that particularly data science teams need to work through. If I'm cutting this data out of it using a particular technique, what are the consequences for my model? And this is particularly even more of an issue for generative AI.
Okay.
Because generative AI relies on the fact that these models memorize data.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, if you ask ChatGPT, when was Mozart born? Give me some of the most famous quotes from Churchill or whatever. It can do it.
Yeah.
It can do it. It will give you the actual text back verbatim. So it's a core functionality of large language models. And then when you try and stop it from memorizing personal data, you're stopping it from memorizing. And this is its core functionality. So unlike what I said before, with there being a real trade-off between data utility and privacy, when it comes to large language models, you may be killing the large language model. It's not a trade-off. It's like if you can't memorize personal data, what's it good for?
Exactly.
Now, we'll have to see how this turns out. We may move to a new technology, and this problem may be solved. But that's kind of the dilemma that we have at the moment with this technology.
Yeah, and just I suppose some of the ones you mentioned there, like the likes of minimal data sets, removing data, synthetic data, etc. I suppose data privacy professionals are already familiar with all this terminology from GDPR. But as you mentioned, when it comes to large language models, it gets more complex. So when it comes to making these decisions in the organization of, I suppose, how to comply or use AI in a safer way, who should be involved in the decision-making process? Like, are we talking still the data protection team, or now should we be including, security, AI governance? Who should be at the table making these decisions, let's say?
I think you should have a big table.
Okay.
Because you do, as I mentioned, some of the privacy enhancing technologies are more about the data, some are more about the privacy aspects, but some of them are more about the security aspects.
Okay.
And given that there are trade-offs and then balances as well, it needs to be jointly with the data scientists, the developers of the applications using the models. Yeah. So it needs to be a multidisciplinary approach. It needs to be a lot of different perspectives at the table. That's the only way you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I suppose ties in with the overall concept of data protection. It is something that involves collaboration across the entire organization. So once again, when it comes to the AI Act, we're in the same space. We need to get collaboration across the organization.
Yes, it's not anything new in that sense that it needs to be collaboration. Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose from what you're saying, as you mentioned, there's trade-offs. So yes, we're making steps, but there are trade-offs. So it looks like there is no watertight solution, let's say. So what would you suggest for organizations to try and help them?
There's a couple of things that I would emphasize, and there is support for this from the old name is Working Party 29, that you can consider security in this, in whether you can re-identify individuals. You can include the factor of security as well as the cost, the practicality of re-identifying individuals. So what this means in practice, my view is that you can look at the privacy enhancing technologies which include security. So in your encryption and so on. Whereas the confidentiality-based privacy-enhancing technologies are, in general, less effective. Okay. So what this means is that you probably get more bang for your buck, and you get more effective privacy enhancement from implementing security techniques. So having really good security. That's one conclusion I've reached. The second thing that you can do as well, okay, maybe you cannot get personal data out of the model itself when it's been trained to remember personal data, but you can still monitor the usage of a model, of a large language model, of a ChatGPT. You can still look at, okay, how are people using it? Are they using it to look up a fellow employee's number in HR with the RAG data, but also are they using it to abuse ChatGPT and so on? So you can monitor the output, and there are tools available that would help you to do that. Okay. There's many tools coming on the market that help you to do that. It won't limit the processing 100%. But in these areas, of course, if you're trying to avoid liability for fines and so on, some good efforts, some good faith measures are at least likely to convince a regulator that you're on the right way.
Okay. But I suppose from what you're saying, there's still a lot of work to be done. So we can try different measures. We can, we can do a certain amount, let's say, to show that we are being as compliant as we can. But
yes,
there's a lot of work to be done to find an outright solution, if you like.
Yes. What is important, though, to do is to assess what you're doing in terms of risk assessments, okay, and look at, and try and describe what these risks are, what you can do to mitigate them, so you are doing proper risk management around them. And the complement to that is particularly, the more likely you are to be processing personal data, it's important to do some real penetration testing. See whether you can abuse your model. See whether you can get some personal data out of it. If it's really difficult, then you've done a good job. But if you've got an outside expert who is successful in getting some personal data out of the model, or more likely, in fact, out of the surrounding storage of the input data and the operational data and the training data, then that penetration testing gives you another level of assurance.
Mm-hmm. And so is that from a deployer's perspective? No, not so much. It's more the provider's perspective. So from a deployer's perspective, you're not
as well as from a deployer's perspective, because as we mentioned, the RAG data that you're introducing to the model, the input data where you're asking a model to, based on this input, please generate a nice sales, marketing, email. These are all also potential sources of personal data and the processing of personal data, right?
Okay. But yeah, I suppose the issue there tends to be because everyone in the organization, let's just say they don't have the same training, they don't understand what they're, the risks that they're creating, let's say. So yeah, I suppose this is where the risk assessments come into place. It's so important to be continuously monitoring the usage of these tools and identifying the potential risks, and obviously then training and education within the organization is key.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, we'll all need to take that path. It's like GDPR was. It wasn't something that everybody could immediately get a grasp on. It's taken some years before both the professionals and those working, directly with personal data have got a sense of, what the risks are and what's allowable and what's not, and how to assess it. So it will be the same kind of journey for AI.
Yeah, well, hopefully slightly easier because we've already got a path traveled for GDPR, and hopefully this will be just a slight variation of it as opposed to starting from scratch.
Yes, and what I've said earlier is just using the GDPR and applying it in this context. It's the same minimization principle. It's the same guidance that we had from 2014 on pseudo-anonymization and anonymization and so on, and it's just applying it in this context.
Yeah,
it's a bit of new technology, but it's applying the same basic principles.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate your time. So there you have it, guys. As Tony said, there is no silver bullet, which is why being part of a community like TrustWorks is so important, and to be able to benefit from the knowledge of experts like Tony. Our next roundtable discussion, From Blocker to Builder, Unleashing Our Superpowers, will take place on Thursday, the 18th of July at 4 o'clock Central European Time. Okay, this roundtable will be led by Luke Beckley, DPO and Head of Privacy and Data Governance with Corella. We all know the skills that the privacy team offers go way beyond just data protection legislation. But in this discussion, we will look at practical ways to use these skills to shift the mindset of the different business units to see us as a builder, not a blocker. So if you're not already a member of the community, remember, you've got a link in the comments. We'd love to have you join us. And once again, thank you, Tony, for sharing your expertise with us today. And thanks to all of you who took the time to join us. Please feel free to reach out to me if I can help you in any way. And that's it. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good day.